Good day, everyone. As you all know, today is May 1st, the International Day of Labor. On that occasion, we would like to comment a few words about the precarious situation of workers in Iran under the clerical rule. In a nutshell, the Iranian workers are living in a very, very deplorable situation under the rule of the mullahs. And the situation is deteriorating rather rapidly in the past few years. And this has caused an enormous surge in number of protests, strikes, and sit-ins by workers, by laborers, and by other strata of the society. And from all indications, this will only increase in months to come. Since last year, since May of last year until now, as a statement by Madam Maryam Rajavi, the president-elect of the Iranian resistance, stipulated, there has been more than 1,300 demonstrations, protest acts, strikes, sit-ins by workers and people of other strata of the Iranian society. In month of April, we just finished, there were at least 250 registered cases of protests and strikes and sit-ins in Iran, and that's a very, very conservative number, and obviously that does not include everything. On the same category, there were like 125 protests and strikes in the month of March. So one can see there's a growing surge in number of protests and strikes, and that is very much due to the miserable situation that the workers and laborers face in Iran today. Many of you have heard or might be cognizant of the fact that on April 16th, teachers in 27 provinces out of the 31 provinces in Iran staged in a protest, and starting from today for the whole next week, there have been calls for protests by the teachers. The height of it is announced to be the May the 6th. So in that context, one can see that as the population is becoming totally disenchanted and fed up with the status quo and the mullahs, there is a growing trend of demonstrations and protest acts, and as I mentioned, for a very good reason. The workers and laborers and wage makers have carried the brunt of the economic peril and pressure in Iran. According to some official statistics, 90%, I repeat, 90% of the population now lives below the poverty line. And the other 10%, as they said, are very quickly joining the other 90%. Actually, as a result of devastating impact of the clerical rule and the injustice and the type of a system that the Velayat Faqih, or absolute rule of the jurisprudence, has imposed on the Iranian people, particularly the workers and office workers and laborers, 1% who are part of the system are getting extreme privileges, and the brunt of the pressure is on the other 99%. To give you some statistics, according to the government figures, the Iranian workers have lost 73% of their purchasing power in the past few years alone. And there is no prospects for improvement. On the other hand, this goes hand in hand with the massive, rampant, pervasive corruption that is going on throughout this regime. The Minister of Interior of the clerical regime of the Rouhani government just a few days ago, on April 26th, cited a few examples of how pervasive this corruption has become, and how people who have government connections through nepotism and favoritism that is part and parcel of this regime are gaining huge wealth and accumulating huge amount of money, while the Iranian workers are under such a tremendous pressure and have a lot of difficulties of their survival and bring about their main day-to-day needs. Another figure that could be very telling is that there was a revelation the other day that every year there are $25 billion of goods smuggled into Iran, and everyone knows that this is done through the government channels and the people who are in the establishment, particularly Revolutionary Guards Corps. So despite the fact that when almost 2 years ago Rouhani came to office with a promise that he will improve the situation, that he will improve the welfare of the people, and basically his promises were solely on the economic front, not only there has not been any improvements, rather one has been witnessing a dramatic decrease of the situation of the workers in Iran. And on the other hand, one has witnessed a huge surge in suppression in Iran. I think it's very telling to notice that while this is the situation of the workers and so much is allocated for their daily needs, Rouhani increased the budget of suppressive forces 53% in the fiscal year that began in March 21st of this year. So while the workers are struggling to have their ends meet, the only part of the budget that gets such a huge increase are suppressive forces, and that speaks volumes about Rouhani and where he stands about the welfare of the Iranian people and the workers. And actually on April 25th, he boasted about the fact that while some government ministers and ministries did not get their full budget because of the quote-unquote economic problems of the government, the suppressive forces, the police and the others, and the state security forces got 100% of their budget, and even in some cases more. So in a nutshell, while the situation of Iranian workers is deteriorating, there's more and more consensus among them that they have to stand up. And that's why we see such a surge in the number of protests, strikes in Iran in recent months. And as time goes by, there's more position by the workers and office workers and laborers that they have to stand up and challenge the regime to get their rights and for their survival. And from all indications, this is going to only increase, and it's going to become more pervasive. On the other hand, the only solution that the regime has offered them is more suppression and more export of their fundamentalism abroad. I think it's very, very telling that while the Iranian people and the workers are suffering as such, according to the UN representative for Syria, the clerical regime has allocated and has spent somewhere like $35 billion in Syria alone in the past 4 years. So one can see where are the priorities for this regime, where all the Iranian people's wealth and capital are going, and that's why people and the workers are resorting to more and more demonstrations. And as I said, from all indications, this is not going to subside, rather we are going to witness this. And to finish this brief summary, the ultimate solution is obviously a regime change in Iran. So far as the clerical regime is in power, there is no way that people will see any benefit in their the welfare. They will not see an improvement of their welfare. The ordinary people, the lay people, are the ones who are the biggest losers, and they are now coming to terms more than ever before that in order to get what they deserve, the only solution is the regime change in their hands and through the organized resistance. And once again, I'm most grateful to have the opportunity to talk to you for a few minutes on the occasion of the May 1st.
Thank you, Mr. Gobadi. We have received a number of questions. The first question that we have received is, has there been any improvement on workers and teachers' situations since Rouhani took office?
As I mentioned, absolutely not. Quite contrary, their situation has been going down in a noise drive. Actually, their situation is deteriorating rather rapidly. Their buying power is decreasing rapidly, and that's why, as I said, you see more and more demonstrations and protests and strikes. In just past April, which was literally finished yesterday, we had at least 250 protest strikes and demonstrations, and some of them rather sizable, like the one I cited on April 16th by the teachers. And there are announcements and calls for a week of protests starting from today, reaching their height on May the 6th. So Rouhani has been anything but good to the Iranian people and to the Iranian workers. Quite contrary, his priorities, like his predecessors, like the other key players of this regime, has been suppression, export of the fundamentalism abroad, and pursuing the drive to obtain nuclear weapons. That's where the priorities are. That's where the budget is spent. So in that context, it is not surprising that the situation of the workers is deteriorating, alongside with the massive, rampant, pervasive corruption that even the regime's officials talk about. As I said, the Interior Minister just a few days ago publicly exposed a few cases of this rampant corruption, and that's obviously the tip of the iceberg, and everybody knows full well that this could not be done without the government approval and people who have government connections.
Yes, the second question is, if sanctions be lifted, would it improve welfare of workers?
Given the economic structure that this regime has imposed on the Iranian people, it's rather inconceivable to think that if the sanctions are lifted, the welfare would be enjoyed by the Iranian people. Again, very much in line with this regime's strategy, very much in line with the regime's normal practice for the past 30-some years. When the sanctions, and if the sanctions are lifted, all the resources will be devoted again for suppressive forces, for export of fundamentalism and terrorism abroad, or it will be embezzled by the regime's officials, revolutionary guards, etc., etc. One has to bear in mind that the main economic entity that very much controls the Iranian economy these days, and this has been a constant pattern, is revolutionary guards. This has been the case for years and years, particularly in the last 10 years, and has continued under Rouhani. So even if there is some sort of a sanctions relief and there's some kind of a cash flow into Iran, the regime's institutions, revolutionary guards, are the ones who will benefit from this, not the ordinary people. There was an amazing revelation last year by Reuters that how one of these institutions that are affiliated to Khamenei's office and basically owned by Khamenei has a financial empire worth of $95 billion. Think for a second, $95 billion. And that's only a case in point. So in that context, there's no way that if there is even a sanctions relief, there will be much improvement in the welfare of Iranian people.
We have another question. Is the miserable situation of workers due to sanction or low oil prices?
Basically, this is what the clerical regime and its officials try to imply. This is their line of logic. This is what they try to depict. But in reality, the problems and the ill of the Iranian people and the workers in particular, so far as it pertains to our talk today, are much more profound than this. Please keep in mind that for the past 10 years, particularly from the years 2005 to 2013, the oil prices were almost always more than $100 a barrel. There was not any much serious sanctions, particularly in the first few years that I cited. The amount of oil that was sold during that period was more than the whole capital that was brought into Iran since oil was found in Iran. I'm talking about somewhere like $700 billion to $1 trillion as a result of oil export on that period. A very good question is, where did all that money go? Why there was not an improvement in infrastructure? why there was not an increase in unemployment. Ali Larijani, the regime's Speaker of the Parliament, made an amazing, shocking revelation the other day. He said 42% of university graduates in Iran are unemployed. 42%. So one cannot say, look, the sad situation of the Iranian workers is consequent of a drop in oil prices or because of the sanctions. What we are witnessing is a corrupt system, a system which is built upon the idea of keeping the regime in power at any cost, and that means plundering the Iranian people's wealth and capital by the regime's officials, by revolutionary guards, by the clergy, spending it on suppression, spending it on export of fundamentalism. As I said, there are some estimates that $35 billion was just spent in Syria in the past 4 years. I think these figures speak volumes.
Yes, another question is, what is the role of rampant corruption in the welfare of workers and teachers?
Well, it has had a dire effect on their welfare. I think I mentioned that in my remarks and in answers to some of the previous questions. It has only exacerbated their terrible situation. And the question is, what's this corruption all about? Why it is so rampant? The answer is, again, it's due to the regime's policies, the way this regime has been structured. The people who are government senior officials, the people who have connections with the Khamenei's office or the president's office and so on and so forth, they are the ones who always get the privileges. As you have seen, some of the embezzlements that have been surfaced are astronomical in the scope and in the amount. So in that case, no capital is left for investment, no capital is left for constructing factories, no capital is left for creating jobs, and that's the situation as we witness today. So, ill of the Iranian people, their problems, corruption, investing all the capital on suppression, they all go hand in hand. These are part of the system. So that's why, as time goes by, the workers and the laborers realize that there is less and less hope on this regime, and that's why we see such a surge in our protests and strikes.
Yes, we have another question. It's what are the demands of Iranian workers and teachers today?
Well, on the first look, they want their most basic economic rights to be fulfilled. Job guarantees, welfare, health insurance, and things like this. But one step further, we see the slogans are becoming free political prisoners. They see, and the slogans become more and more politicized and political. So, intuitively, they sense, they notice, they realize that their most basic demands and needs immediately become political. This is the nature of the situation in Iran. What we have today in Iran, because of the in the labor force or in the economy, is direct, and I emphasize direct consequence and result of this regime and how it functions and how it carries its work. So that's why, while their demands are very, very basic and most rudimentary rights, immediately this becomes political because of the nature of the situation in Iran today. In a nutshell, Iran is a powder cage. People are waiting to protest, and the situation erupts very quickly. And that's why the regime is so keen on suppression. That's why we see such a surge in executions as well, because the regime fully understands the people's legitimate grudges. They realize people's legitimate grievances, and the regime has no intention, neither capacity to respond to them. So the only way they can keep their regime in power is by more repression, as I said, and by exporting fundamentalism abroad and driving to acquire nuclear weapons. So in that sense, while the demands of the workers and the teachers looks very, very basic, I think very quickly it goes to the heart of the matter, and that's the political regime and the way it functions and operates.
Yes, we have received another question. What is the ultimate solution for current situation in Iran?
I think the ultimate solution is the regime change by the Iranian people and the organized resistance. This regime is not going to reform. This regime cannot reform. This regime is totally incapable of responding to people's demands. This regime is out of tune with history and the very legitimate demands of the Iranian people. So the only solution for the workers, the only solution for the laborers, the only solution for all the strata of Iranian society is regime change. And I think they are the ones who understand this better than anyone else. And that's why I think makes the mullahs the most fearful, because they realize that how untenable the situation is. I told you there has been more than 1,300 demonstrations, protest acts and strikes in Iran since last year alone. And I think this is not the whole picture. So in that context, if one looks at this from an overview, the only solution would be the regime's overthrow by the Iranian people and the organized resistance. And that is the mullah's nightmare, and they know this will ultimately happen.
Yes, we have got another question. It's asking, some Westerners who have been in Iran say situation is not bad. What do you think?
Well, yes, they're right. The situation is not bad for that 1% who have accumulated astronomical wealth by, as I said, embezzlement, by corruption, by smuggling. The people who have made huge commissions as a result of these smugglings. Yes, if one goes there and deals with those sort of people, with the, as there was this story on the Instagram a few months ago, the rich kids of Tehran, obviously they would see the situation is not that bad. But the situation is very bad for the army of unemployed, for the 90% people who are living under the poverty line, for the workers who have to work 2 or 3 jobs a day just to make their minimum needs met, for the workers who have lost 73% of their purchasing power in the past few years, and so on and so forth. So in that sense, I would say they are talking about the people who are basically swimming in money, but on the other hand, the people who are part of the regime and only benefit from the regime's as a nepotism and favoritism, again, in order to keep the regime in power.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gobadi. Thank you for your briefing, and we wish you to see you again.
Thank you very much, and have a nice day to everyone.